I used to be seen as eccentric, even as not quite normal, not because I did anything outrageously different, but because I didn't live the way the majority did. I didn't choose the paths that made other people feel at ease. When I was young, that frightened me deeply. I was afraid of the looks, afraid of questions that didn't really need answers, afraid of the feeling that I was disappointing someone, even though I owed them nothing. At that time, I believed something many people believe, that living in a way others approve of is safer, that being accepted matters more than being true to yourself. That belief sounds reasonable. It helps you blend in. It keeps you from being isolated. It helps you avoid trouble. But no one told me something else, that the price of that kind of safety is time, and it is yourself. I began to adjust who I was, saying the things I was supposed to say, doing the things I was supposed to do, putting off the difficult questions, putting off even the most genuine desires. I told myself, later, after things are more stable, after others feel more at ease, after everything becomes clearer. But time doesn't wait for things to become clear. It just moves on. Now, looking back, I'm no longer angry at anyone, not at my family, not at society. I've only come to realize one thing that I feel compelled to say, that so many young people are living under the gaze of others without even realizing it. Why do we live to make others feel at ease, instead of living so that we ourselves won't have regrets? I admit it, I was wrong. I believed there would always be time to fix things, until one day, the first signs appeared, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet feeling that I had gone quite far down a road that wasn't entirely my own. When I was young, I believed that what other people thought of me was everything, not because I was weaker than anyone else, but because I was like most people. I watched closely who was praised, who was criticized, who was accepted, who was pushed aside, and then I began to adjust myself, adjust my words, adjust my choices, adjust even the things I hadn't yet found names for. Not to live better, but to live just enough. Enough to please others. Enough to meet expectations. Enough to fit what is called normal. I told myself I was being smart, that living honestly too early was risky, that it was better to wait a little longer, wait for the right moment, wait until it felt safe enough. So I waited, and then I waited some more. And while I was waiting, time did not stop to wait for me. Important decisions were postponed, not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I was afraid of what others would think if I chose it. I see myself in so many young people, people who aren't living badly, not reckless, not lost, yet always living in a temporary state, temporarily doing this job, temporarily staying in that relationship, temporarily setting aside their true desires because the time isn't right yet. That belief sounds reasonable, but it hides another truth, that no one ever truly grants you the permission to live honestly. The mending is one, and there is no moment that naturally announces itself as the right time. How many of your decisions have been postponed simply because you were afraid of being judged? I don't blame youth. Youth isn't wrong, it just believed the wrong thing. And when you believe the wrong thing for long enough, you begin to assume that your life belongs to the gaze of others. But then, over time, something slowly comes into view, not loudly, not forcefully, just a very gentle comparison between being accepted and no longer having enough time to live honestly. It took me a very long time to grow up, a very long time, not because I wasn't intelligent, not because I lacked experience, but because I misunderstood what growing up really meant. I once believed that being mature meant being considerate, not causing inconvenience, fulfilling my role, living in a way that made no one uncomfortable because of me. I carried that belief very far, so far that I forgot to ask a simple question. Was I actually living or just meeting expectations? Only after I'd passed through enough years, through enough moments of staying silent instead of speaking honestly, did I come to realize a truth. So simple it was cruel. As long as you are not hurting anyone, not trampling on others, then what people think of you matters far less than you once believed. Not because they are unkind, but because they are busy living their own lives too. But my youth was spent worrying about that unimportant thing. Every small decision, every major turning point, always had the gaze of others standing in front of it. Here is the paradox. We spend our entire youth protecting our image, and only when we grow older. And do we realize that the time for the things that truly matter has quietly diminished? I wasn't angry when I realized this. I only felt regret. Regret for the times I lived far more cautiously than necessary. Have you ever asked yourself, if today you dared to live just a little more truthfully, what would actually collapse? When I began to ask that question, everything didn't change right away. But the way I looked at life did. Compared to the fear of being judged, I began to see another fear, quieter, more subtle, the fear of waking up each morning and not knowing whether I was still of any use at all. I am 82 years old. I don't feel old, not because I deny my age, but because every morning I still have a reason to wake up. I still work, not much, not in a hurry, but steadily. When people ask me why I still work, I don't know how to answer it briefly, because work, for me now, is no longer about making a living. It is about knowing that I am still needed. Once, I took on the repair of an old musical instrument, so old that many people said it shouldn't be touched anymore. The wood was worn, the structure had warped, the sound was gone. I knew they were right, and I also knew that if I failed, I would lose months over something that left nothing behind. But I did it anyway, day by day, slowly, very slowly. There were moments when I thought I no longer had enough patience, moments when my hands trembled, moments when I thought maybe I should stop. But then, one day, when the first sound came out, not full, not perfect, but alive, I understood something very clearly. I still had a reason to exist. Not because I repaired the instrument, but because I was still creating value, however small, for something that would continue after I stopped. Many people think old age is about resting, about letting go, about stepping aside, but I've begun to see it differently. Between having lived enough and no longer being needed, there is a very fragile distance. And when I saw that clearly, another fear began to surface. Not loudly, not dramatically. The fear was not death. It was becoming useless. I'm not afraid of death, at least not in the way many people think. I'm afraid of something else. I'm afraid of becoming useless. I've seen it happen, not in books, but in people very close to me. They worked their whole lives. They had positions, they had schedules, they had people calling their names every day. And then, at some point, they retired. No alarm clock ringing, no one waiting, no work that truly needed them to finish. At first, there was relief, then emptiness, and very slowly, another feeling crept in. The feeling of no longer being needed. No one ever said it to them directly, but their bodies knew, their eyes knew, the silence of long mornings knew. When a person is no longer useful, their sense of existence begins to collapse from the inside. Not all at once, but little by little. There is a common false belief here, that as long as you work long enough, earn enough money, old age will naturally be peaceful. But peace doesn't come from stopping. It comes from knowing that you still have something to contribute. I'm not saying everyone has to work until the end of their life. I'm simply asking, if one day you stop completely, what will you have left? Are you preparing for old age, or are you postponing, only to lose yourself, while believing you've already finished the important part of life? Compared to the fear of death, this fear is quieter, but it stays longer. And when I think more deeply, I realize the problem isn't only about whether we are still useful or not. It lies in how we have lived before, in what we have accumulated, and in what we once believed was important. It took me many years to understand this. Money needs to be enough, just enough, not because money is bad, but because too much money is a dangerous zone that few people recognize when they are young. I've met very wealthy people wealthier than I ever thought was necessary. And I've also seen how unhappy they were, not because they lacked anything, but because they never felt it was enough. They were always busy, always accumulating, always holding on tightly, holding on to things that should have been used to live. I once believed a familiar idea too, that having a little more would make everything safer, that planning far ahead was wisdom. But time taught me a different lesson, that when you spend too much of your life stockpiling, you won't have much life left to experience. You don't need much. You don't need to show it off. You don't need meaningless accumulation. You only need enough not to be afraid, and enough to still be free. Free to choose how you live, free to say no, free from having to trade your healthy years for a future that may not even exist. Have you ever asked yourself, are you making money to live or living only to make money? I'm not advising anyone to abandon ambition. I only see that many people have gone too far before stopping to ask how much they truly need. Compared to owning more, I've begun to see living deeply as more important. And when we live long enough, we come to realize that it isn't only money that can drain a person dry. There is something else, quieter, but no less dangerous. It is rigidity. Aging in the body is natural. I accepted that fairly early. But there is another kind of aging that worries me far more. It's when the mind begins to close. I've seen people who no longer want to listen, not because they are deaf, but because they are certain they are right. They repeat what is familiar. They defend old viewpoints. They grow uncomfortable when someone thinks differently. At first, it's just disagreement. Then it becomes a refusal to understand. And very slowly, it turns into an inability to learn anything new. When you no longer accept other perspectives, you begin to die little by little. Not physically, but mentally. What is the false belief here? That the older you get, the more certain you must be. The more firmly you must hold your position. The more you must be right. But time taught me something else. That maturity is not about being more right than others, but about accepting that others have the right to be different from you. I was rigid too. I was uncomfortable when challenged. I thought I understood life better, simply because I had lived longer, until I realized that every time I closed myself to another perspective, I was shrinking my own world. Have you ever noticed yourself reacting faster than listening? Defending your opinion rather than trying to understand? If so, that isn't a fault, but it is a sign. Compared to aging in the body, aging in the mind leaves a person far more alone. And when I looked more deeply, I realized that rigidity doesn't come only from age. It also comes from fear. The fear of loss, the fear of losing control. And there are losses that no amount of openness can prevent. I lost 2 children. I say that not to seek your pity and not to prove that I have endured more than anyone else. It is simply a fact. There is no other way to say it. There is no way to get over something like that. Anyone who tells you they have gotten over it either has never truly lost or is lying to themselves. For me, there is only one way: to live with it. There are days that pass quite normally, and there are days that don't. There is no warning sign, no pattern. I once tried to understand. I asked myself why. I searched for a reason large enough to make acceptance possible. But then I stopped, because there are things that can never be understood. Death is one of them. A false belief many people carry is that every loss must have meaning, must teach us something, must lead to a beautiful conclusion. That isn't true. There are losses that simply happen. No lesson, no reward, no answer. And when we try to force them to mean something, we only exhaust ourselves further. I learned something very slowly. That acceptance is not agreement. It is stopping the fight against what cannot be changed. Have you ever thought, if tomorrow something important disappeared, what would you have left? Compared to the fears I had before, this fear does not push. It only reminds. It reminds us that life is finite and that not everything lies within our control. When I accepted that, I began to see life differently, not lighter, but clearer. And from that clarity, one final question slowly emerged. I will die. I say that very calmly, not because I am tired of living, but because I know it is the common ending for everyone. But there is one thing that gives me peace. The instruments I have made will continue to be played, not because they are perfect, but because they are still usable. They still produce sound. They can still touch someone after I'm no longer here. When I think about that, I see a very clear paradox. My death matters less than what I left behind that was useful while I was alive. We are often afraid of being forgotten, afraid of disappearing, afraid of leaving no trace. But what makes a person disappear the fastest is not death. It is living without creating anything that goes beyond oneself. A legacy does not have to be grand. It does not need to be named. It does not need to be remembered. Sometimes it is simply a skill you pass on, a way of living you allow others to see, a small value that is enough to continue. Have you ever asked yourself, when you stop, what of you will still go on? Not your bank account, not your title, not the things tightly attached to your name, but what you have given. Compared to the fear of loss, this question does not weigh me down. It only makes me more awake. And when I sit with that question long enough, I realize the issue is not about leaving behind something great. It is about whether we are postponing a useful life of our own. Because time does not wait. In the end, everything I've said comes back to one truth that cannot be avoided. Time does not wait for you to be ready. And life does not give you a rehearsal. I've lived long enough to see this repeat itself in so many people, even those who are intelligent, even those who are hardworking. They didn't fail because they weren't capable. They simply postponed the things that should have been lived earlier. I was like that once. I thought there was still time. I thought I could wait. I thought that one day everything would naturally become clear. But here is the paradox. The longer you wait, the less time you have to live honestly. Eventually, you no longer get to choose. You are left only with acceptance. And when you look back, what hurts people most is not that they tried and failed. It is that they never tried at all. Now, I'm no longer talking about myself. I'm talking about you. When will you start living a useful life? Or will you wait until no one needs you anymore before you begin to ask yourself what you've missed? Living long is not success. Success is reaching a day when you can stop without having to say to yourself, if only, and then maybe I am all. That choice does not belong to tomorrow. It belongs to this very moment.